Welcome to the weekly wrap from Brand Swiss. This week, as has been the case for the last few weeks, we're going to be talking about Ukraine as the primary story. The situation continues to get worse. The Russians have definitely not been able to wrap up the situation as quickly as I think they had expected to do. There was hopes that it would be done by this week, at least some kind of deal will be done, or the Russians would have basically crushed the resistance. Neither of that is the case. There are talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians ongoing in Belarus, but it hasn't really gotten to results yet. I think maybe the Ukrainians do believe that they will get more support than they have been getting from the Western powers, but that has not really materialized to the extent they've wanted to maybe. They certainly are getting some humanitarian aid. They've been taken in significant numbers to places like Poland and Romania and so on. But however, we are not seeing, there was talk last week about jets, for instance, coming from Sweden and so on for them. That's not happening. They will get small arms, but they're not going to get like really significant large arms from, any kind of NATO affiliated kind of anywhere else in Ukraine, basically, because the Russians have indicated that, you support the Ukrainians with military weaponry, they might consider that to be an act of war. And if you're not a NATO member, like Finland's not a NATO member, Sweden's not a NATO member, that could be really painful for you. We are seeing that situation continue to get worse. That's caused the oil price to spike up significantly. At one point this week, the oil price approached $120 a barrel for Brent crude. Remember, just a little while ago, a few months ago, $80 a barrel was considered to be, a reasonably high price. So we're talking about a move up of 50% from what was considered to be a highish price. And we also are seeing, other commodity prices start to increase as well. Gold is going up. Platinum hasn't really moved up. I think platinum is also being restricted by the fact that car production is under, threat at the moment. We are also seeing, commodity prices like iron ore as well going higher, coal going higher, positive companies like Exaro, Kumba. But at the moment we are, nowhere near end to it, and we are seeing prices being moved up. The one real fear in the world is, or that I have in particular, is on food inflation. Food inflation, I think, is going to be really a big problem going forward. We are seeing, two countries that are responsible for 25% of the wheat production in the world, a significant percentage of the fertilizer production in the world. A number of other agricultural products come out from these two countries. They are gigantic countries. They are, Russia is absolutely enormous compared to any other country, and the Ukraine looks tiny compared to Russia, but compared to most other Western European countries, it's quite massive. So you're talking about a huge amount of land, a huge amount of agricultural capacity taken off the world market. In addition to that, like I said, agricultural supplies like fertilizer are also going to be affected. If food inflation becomes a problem, we could see a lot of instability around the world, especially in poorer nations. You may not recall this, but the Arab Spring was in partly caused by food inflation. Historically, whenever you see food inflation, you tend to see unrest in poorer places. You could argue that the French Revolution, going far back as that, was about food inflation. The fall of the Rome's issues back in 2,000 years was because food was quite pricey. Now, for the modern wealthier person, put the person watching this here, food probably doesn't take up more than 5-10% of your budget. If you wanted to, you can get down to maybe a couple percent of your budget and have enough calories to support you, because you're quite wealthy, or reasonably wealthy, relatively wealthy, let me say. But if you imagine if you are somebody in South Africa living off one of the grants, a few hundred rands a month, and which you support yourself and be a couple of family members, in that scenario, you probably are spending half of your money on food, maybe more. And if you see food inflation spike up, 20-30%, increase in prices, that's really going to make an impact on your lifestyle and your ability to live, not lifestyle, but your ability to live. So I think that's going to be a real concern going forward. Of course, historically, when you do see oil prices rise like this year, it's a case where generally, recessions tend to follow reasonably soon thereafter. And I think that's something that we probably are going to see in a number of places around the world experiencing some real difficulty. Countries like India are going to experience difficulty. China, one of the biggest importers or I think the biggest importer of energy in the world, is also going to experience some difficulties unless they can make a deal, for instance, with the Russians, where they do share a border. We are also likely to see, like I said, with the food inflation, unrest occurring in other parts of the world, it might cause their own situations. For instance, unrest occurs in some country that's responsible for significant copper production, that takes copper off the market and increases the copper price. That's the kind of stuff that I think we might be seeing. It might be like a cascading domino effect in the commodity sector. The next thing, just look at some of the stuff that came out in the last couple of days in South Africa. We had some Banya's numbers coming out. The market was a little disappointed by them. We also see strike action occurring at that mine, of the mining house. Basically, it's going to be a real difficulty, I believe, when it comes to trying to adjust or maintain wage agreements going forward. Because, like I said, if food inflation is high and we're talking about transport, oil prices going higher, it's going to be more difficult to live. And if you've agreed to, for instance, a 3 to 4% or 5%, whatever it may be, increase in wages over the next couple of years, and then suddenly you see inflation topping 7-8% for you personally, maybe even higher. In real terms, you are losing a couple percent in terms of your wages in real terms. And then that means that you are likely to be more militant, more eager to go for a strike, especially when you see, for instance, that the company itself is making some serious profits because commodity prices are rising. So I would expect some moves for negotiation or renegotiation of wages in the mining sector, the commodity sector, for the next year or so, because higher prices, bigger profits, makes it more attractive to go on strike. And also at the same time, higher cost of living, higher inflation really affects the workers in a bad way. At the same time, the mining companies may not be as willing to do this because, of course, they believe that the profits might be temporary, and therefore, if you increase wages, you're not going to be able to drop them later. So they won't want to say, okay, it's a temporary phenomenon, it's going to disappear, and therefore, we can't afford to give you this wage increase because, it's going to be locked in. Next, talking about inflation, Jerome Powell has come out and he has said that the US is probably going to go and start raising interest rates quite soon. He's going to raise interest rates, but not to the extent that maybe people had been fearing a month ago. About a month ago, a week before the Russia crisis started, so about 2 weeks ago or so, you were seeing a number of companies, JP Morgan, come out, for instance, with, I think they were predicting 9, increases over the next 2 years. You had like Goldman, a number of different, banks, financial institutions come out and say they were expecting a higher number of rate hikes, for the next year or two from the US Fed. With the stuff happening in Russia, they still have to do something because inflation in the US is over 7%. That's not a sustainable level. But I don't think they'll be anywhere near as aggressive as people had been thinking just a little while ago. The growth rates in, for instance, Germany, in Europe, is probably going to be under pressure. We are likely to see, with high commodity prices, this threat of recession in many developing countries. And in the US, people are really sensitive to higher oil prices. I mean, I think in San Francisco at the moment, average oil prices has broken $5 a barrel, and the US $5 a gallon. And the US $5 a gallon is a very key psychological level. It's like, an insanely high level in their minds. And therefore there is some real pushback at that level of oil, of petrol cost or gasoline cost. So I think that we are going to be seeing some kind of move to try and bring that down. At the same time, they're going to be very hard pressed to do it. We have seen Biden release some reserves and coordination, I think, with just other countries. I think it's about 30 million barrels from the US and 60 million from everybody in total. But that hasn't done anything. The day after that occurred, oil prices hit $119 a barrel before pulling back to about 109, 110. So I think the market knows that that's nowhere near enough to compensate for the loss of production from Russia indefinitely. It's large, but it's, like I said, it's going to be, if you take Russia out of the market indefinitely, it's going to disappear. Okay, so that's basically the situation in the world at the moment. Oh, and by the way, as I speak to you right now, there's apparently some kind of crisis at a nuclear power plant in Russia and in Ukraine. So it's too many stories to even talk about. Hopefully, we can see some kind of resolution to this crisis in the next week or two. The longer it goes, the worse it's going to be. The more people are going to die. We're already starting to see thousands of civilians' deaths. According to the Ukrainians, we have seen about 6,000 Russian deaths. According to the Russians, about 500 Russian deaths. But I think according to many estimates, we've seen a couple thousand at the very least civilian deaths. There's been bombing of cities. There has been more brutality on the part of the Russians in terms of how they take on the Ukrainians. And if this thing goes on for another week or two, we could see even more limits taken off the Russian offensive here. To a certain extent, the Russians have been extremely careful the first week. But if they can suffer more casualties, they have actually suffered 6,000 casualties. Their ability or their willingness rather, to be as light-handed as they have been for the last week will disappear. And then you're more likely to see not just official increase in brutality, but maybe even among the soldiers themselves, which is obviously the worst case scenario. So like I said, hopefully by next week this is resolved, and next week we talk about something different, but we don't know for certain what's going to happen. And just keep safe this weekend, and I'll speak to you guys next week. That's it for the weekly wrap from Rand Swiss. Thank you.